I thought surviving my father was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. Because the night I ran away, I discovered my father wasn't just a violent drunk. He was Mafia. And the man who rescued me? He was the rival kingpin my father feared more than prison, more than death. In one night, I went from abused daughter to the most dangerous woman in a Mafia war.
Eels. She is the image of pure terror, the flight instinct stripped bare, barefoot on the frozen Chicago concrete, her mouth bleeding, her heart beats like a frantic drum. She sees him, a man leaning against a luxury car, radiating a cold, Eels, predatory dominance. In a desperate pivot, she lunges toward him, a silent plea for safety. Despite his hollow, sociopathic stare, he reacts with a primal reflex to her shivering vulnerability. He pulls her in, becoming a human fortress, Eels. From the safety of his shadow, he glares at the predator, her father, who flinches from this display of superior power. She clings to her savior, unaware she has just stepped into the reach of a different kind of beast, Eels. This one moment of intervention changed their lives forever. For those following on the My Stories platform, our case study continues. She is slipping into sensory deprivation, Eels, her world shrinking to the metallic taste of blood in the scrape of the street. Chicago in March is a sub-zero nightmare, but she feels nothing. Adrenaline has completely numbed the cold. Her thermal regulation is failing, Eels. But the cortisol in her system keeps her moving, driven by the absolute dread of being caught. Her amygdala has taken the wheel, silencing all logic. She is not running toward a goal. She is merely vibrating away from a lethal shadow. If she stops, Eels, she knows it means total destruction. Eels. History shows a brutal cycle of domestic violence at the hands of her father, Grigor Istvan. Since the age of 6, this house was a kingdom of fear. She learned to live in a state of constant hypervigilance, barricading doors just to sleep, Eels. Even as an adult, she remained a prisoner of his economic abuse. He used money as a leash, sabotaging her career to keep her from escaping. It is the classic anatomy of Stockholm Syndrome, where the known devil feels safer than the dark world outside, Eels. But tonight, a psychological line was crossed. The old order shattered, replaced by a desperate, bloody flight into the great unknown. Eels. The assault erupted without warning, no shouting, just the sudden, sickening thud of a closed fist. The blow sent her reeling through the house, her world spinning. That violence triggered an ancient survival reflex, Eels. She scrambled for the exit as Gregor screamed her name, not as a parent, but as a master calling a stray dog. To this narcissist, his daughter is only a possession in revolt. She moved through the building with trembling limbs, Eels, her motor skills failing under a massive cortisol spike. The rusted fire escape became her bridge, a cold iron path leading from domestic captivity to the high-stakes terror of the city streets. Eels. After her escape, she enters a dissociative fog. The familiar streets of Chicago turn alien as her brain chooses survival over memory. She has nothing, no money, no identification, wearing only thin sleepwear soaked in her own blood. Then she sees it, Eels, a high-value black vehicle. In this neighborhood, such a car is a ghost, an impossible signal of wealth and power. This is her first look at him, a man whose very posture suggests a lethal quiet capability. He is perfectly still, a predator at rest, Eels. Watching as this broken, bleeding girl stumbles across the border into his dark and dangerous reality. Eels. He stands with an air of absolute territorial command, shoulders broad, jaw set in a mask of stoic indifference. Dark tattoos peek from his sleeves, hinting at a life in the underworld. He is on the phone, but the sight of a bleeding, Eels, barefoot woman creates a jagged rift in his focus. Driven by a dying spark of hope, she throws herself against him. Her plea for a 1-second embrace is a tactical gamble for a human shield. The man freezes in a state of shock. His muscles lock, Eels, caught between his cold antisocial training and a buried protective instinct. A predator, suddenly touched by a casualty, Eels. His eyes hold no pity, no disgust, only a cold analytical weighing of her soul. Finally, he allows the embrace, his movements heavy and deliberate. He becomes her human shield, a wall of hard muscle and expensive fabric that swallows her small frame. Eels. For a moment, her world stabilizes. She can feel his heart, a steady, slow thrum that mocks her own racing pulse. This difference tells his story. He is a man forged in violence, his threshold for fear set far higher than normal. Eels. As she begins to shake in the wake of the trauma, she finds a temporary anchor in his clinical, unshakable composure. Eels. Wrapped in this temporary fortress, she begins to process the horror she left behind. His scent, a mix of cedar and high-end cologne, is a sensory life pulling her away from the pain. For 1 second, time stops. It is an artificial safety, feels, but she clings to it. His embrace is mechanical, devoid of warmth, yet his grip is solid and reliable. But then his body changes. His muscles coil with a new dangerous tension as he shifts from protector to hunter. His focus snaps away from her, heals. Scanning the darkness, the sentinel has awakened, sensing the approach of another predator in the immediate shadows. Heals. A territorial standoff begins. The man lifts his chin, a silent assertion of dominance over the encroaching dark. Even without looking, she knows who is coming. The rhythmic sound of her father's walk is a trauma trigger etched into her brain. Heals. This is silent psychological warfare between two different kinds of monsters. Her protector says nothing, but a low-frequency vibration rumbles in his chest, a primal warning of lethal intent. Gregor Istvan, heals, recognizing a power far more absolute than his own, chooses survival over pride. He retreats into the night, his footsteps fading. The threat is neutralized, beaten back by the sheer gravity of a superior force. Feels. As the threat vanishes, her nervous system begins to collapse. She lets go of his coat, her knuckles white from the strain. The man does not offer comfort. Instead, he begins a clinical interrogation, identifying the antagonist. Feels. He prioritizes threat assessment over emotional support. When she finally whispers the word father, it is heavy with soul-crushing shame. The word is jagged, broken by years of trauma. He receives this data with a chilling, detached silence, feels, his mind calculating the variables of her nightmare without a trace of conventional empathy. Feels. He examines her injuries with a terrifying clinical calm. When he mentions her split lip, it sounds like a diagnostic report, not a gesture of concern. She reaches up, her fingers confirming the sticky reality of dried blood. He asks where she lives, feels, a question that feels like a dark, cruel joke. In her current state, bleeding barefoot and utterly alone, she has nowhere to go. Her soft refusal is met with a calculated, wordless nod. He pockets his phone, feels, the clicking sound signaling the end of his curiosity and the beginning of a cold new phase of intervention. Feels. It is clear now that he ended his call the moment she touched him. She has become his primary objective. Another man emerges from the shadows, blending perfectly into the urban gloom, a tactical associate, silent and sharp, feels. He watches the scene with a practiced neutrality, his eyes cataloging the bleeding woman and his master's reaction. There is a silent, telepathic exchange of data between them, a recalibration of the night's goals, feels. The arrival of this second man confirms a dark truth. She has not just stumbled upon a stranger, but a structured, lethal hierarchy, feels. Ronan tells her to get in the car. It sounds like a suggestion, but his eyes say it is mandatory. Her only snaps back with sarcasm. She mocks the idea of climbing into a stranger's ride after one touch. A thin ghost of a smile haunts his lips. He likes her fire. Then he gives her a name, Ronan. It is the first link in a chain, a formal introduction to his world. She crosses the line. She is in his space now. Feels. Iris takes the gamble, stepping into the dark interior despite knowing nothing about this man. She is freezing, bleeding out, and shattered by the horrors left behind in the alleyway. Between two monsters, she picks the one she does not know, feels. Inside the sedan, Roan Morgan is a statue of ice. He avoids her touch with surgical precision, recalibrating the air between them. Every inch of space is calculated. He treats their earlier closeness as a data error, a tactical lapse to be erased, feels. The way he sits rigid and silent makes that brief embrace feel like a sin he is already repenting, feels. Through the glass, Iris watches her old life vanish, block by block. The car is heavy with the kind of silence only strangers share. They pull up to a shimmering Chicago high-rise, a monolith of power she has only ever seen from the street, feels. Ronan Morgan moves first, showing no politeness, only the tactical focus of a man protecting an asset. He leads her to a 7th-floor apartment. The rooms are sterile and hollow, a transition zone designed to hide the soul. There are no photos, feels, no clutter, nothing that tells her who he really is, feels. The city lights look peaceful from this high up, a lie told to the world below. Ronan Morgan stands at the door, refusing to cross the threshold into her temporary sanctuary. He leaves her with the basics and a promise. The questioning starts tomorrow, feels. Iris has 1,000 burning questions about his name and why her father looked so terrified. Her nervous system is a frayed wire. Exhaustion washes over her like a dark tide, feels, and she no longer has the strength to fight the need to disappear into sleep, feels. Iris whispers a hollow thank you into the sterile air. As the lock clicks, her instincts finally surrender. She falls into a heavy sleep, accepting this gilded cage for now. In the hallway, Ronan Morgan stands like a specter, analyzing her through the wood. Cillian Hale emerges from the gloom, his face a silent demand for answers. For Hale, this deviation from protocol is a dangerous crack in their discipline. Eels. Cillian Hale delivers a chilling observation. Ronan usually avoids such intimacy with his charges. A silent nod is Ronan's only reply before he vanishes. Iris wakes to an alien geography of comfort. The sheets are too smooth, the silence too thick. Eels. She finds herself yearning for the familiar stench of tobacco and decay. No shouting voices or heavy footfalls disturb the peace, yet the sting on her skin remains. She confronts the mirror, Eels, forced to witness the physical evidence of last night's brutality. Eels. Dark bruises bloom across her cheek like unwanted flowers. A thin scab seals her broken lip. Under the hot water, Iris feels like a ghost haunting a luxury she never earned. She is physically free. Testing her boundaries, she opens the door only to find Cillian Hale. He is a fixture of the hallway, a sentinel carved from stone. His expressionless eyes track her every movement. He was not there by chance. He was anticipating her inevitable urge to flee. Eels. Hale regards her with the clinical detachment of a bookkeeper. He states simply that Ronan will return in 1 hour for an audience. Iris affects a false pose of indifference, masking her trembling hands behind a facade of boredom. For a fleeting second, a twitch disturbs the corners of Hale's mouth. It is a rare glitch in a man who functions like a Swiss watch. Without a word, he retreats back in his mechanical shell, leaving Iris to decipher the meaning behind that brief, human tremor. Eels. Cillian observes the obvious. Flight is impossible when one is barefoot and bleeding. Iris feels the sting of her own helplessness as she retreats. She maintains her dignity despite the borrowed clothes and empty pockets. For the next hour, Eels, she paces the kitchen, unnerved by the surgical precision of the pantry. She eats in silence, watching the urban pulse from the window. Her thoughts are a frantic loop of escape plans that go nowhere. With no coin and no allies, Eels, she is effectively a prisoner of circumstance. Eels. When Ronan Morgan enters, the atmosphere tightens around her. Iris prepares for an emotional tempest, but she finds only a frozen lake. He examines her injuries with the cold eye of an auditor. Then comes the news. Gregor is gone. Eels. Her father has been erased from existence, leaving no traces for the world to find. He discusses her primary tormentor as if he were merely closing a redundant file. There is no empathy in his delivery. To a man like Ronan, Eels, her father was never a person, only a variable that required elimination. Eels. A surge of relief washes over Iris, quickly followed by a chill of realization. She begins to grasp the terrifying reach of Ronan's influence. He remains a portrait of stillness, his emotions fortified behind an iron gate. Eels. He frames her father as a resolved threat, but insists she requires sanctuary. To Iris, the word protection feels like a foreign language. It is an ill-fitting shroud she has never been allowed to wear. Having lived a life of constant peril, Eels, the sudden absence of danger feels more threatening than the danger itself. Eels. Iris meets the offer of help with a cynical sneer. Her upbringing taught her that every kindness is a debt paid in blood. She recognizes gifts only as concealed blades and treats Ronan's benevolence as a trap. Ronan offers no defense. Eels. He simply reiterates her safety before turning back to his business. In the ensuing quiet, Iris reaches for the landline to call Soraya. She desperately needs a change of clothes. She cannot bear the weight of these rags. Eels, the final artifacts of her narrow escape from her father's house. Eels. Iris recounts the harrowing sequence, the struggle with Gregor, the frantic flight, and her mysterious savior. When Soraya Nasri arrives, she is overwhelmed by the opulence and Cillian's icy reception. Eels. Soraya struggles to categorize the situation. Is this a ransom or a windfall? Cillian Hale remains unmoved by her confusion. He remarks that her perception is irrelevant. In the shadows where they dwell, fortune and felony often look the same. Eels. Whether she was saved by luck or by malice, the proximity to death remains unchanged. Eels. Look at them. Soraya gestures toward Cillian as if he were a malfunctioning relic. The statue actually has a voice, she notes, startled by his tone. Cillian exits, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Eels. Soraya pulls Iris into an embrace that serves as a solitary anchor against the tide. When they part, Soraya's expression turns flint. A single nod from Iris confirms Gregor's fate. Soraya's vow of vengeance is delivered with chilling casualness. Eels. But Iris pivots the conversation. She reveals that the predator is already being consumed. This realization shakes Soraya. Iris has evolved from a survivor into a silent observer of an impending massacre. Feels. Soraya cleans the wounds with a tenderness that feels like a mask. Iris remains distant, recoiling from the very help she receives. As Soraya departs, Ronan reappears with the predatory grace of a professional. Feels. He lingers at the edge of the room like a sentinel in a tomb. Suddenly, the quiet is shattered. Iris offers a quiet word of thanks. It is an unintended breach in her defenses. She finally honors the life he preserved, feels, a moment of vulnerability that exposes her soul. The kitchen island stands between them like a demilitarized zone. In this half-light, a dark connection begins to take hold, feels. Iris recalls the previous night, the physical contact that shifted her reality. Ronan hesitates. He lacks the vocabulary for intimacy and the patience for gratitude. A telltale twitch in his hand betrays the man of steel, feels. He is adrift in unfamiliar emotional waters. He bluntly rejects her appreciation, desperate to reestablish his cold exterior. Iris refuses to look away. She peers past the assassin to find the human heart buried beneath. Perhaps it is bravery, feels, or perhaps it is insanity. She gazes into his void and discovers a peculiar, haunting serenity. The air between them grows dense, laden with the shared history of two broken lives. Feels. He clears his throat as the moment fractures like thin ice. A ringing phone severs the fragile connection. In an instant, his vulnerability is discarded for the lethal focus of a hunter. His gaze hardens, his jaw setting as the sovereign returns. Feels. Iris recognizes that energy, the same force that decimated Gregor. The shift is total and terrifying. After the call, Ronan remains in a taut, loaded silence. This is more than mere detachment. It is the focused resolve of a man prepared for war. Feels. Iris watches him with a sinking heart, grasping the true scale of his darkness. He has chosen his path. Their old world has ended, and the fire is coming. Feels. His expression calcifies as the implications of the call set in. The strategic terrain has shifted. Iris searches for clues in his silence, but Ronan is a fortress. He postpones their conversation until tomorrow. Feels. A tactical delay against the rising tide. He abandons her to the dark, her mind racing. She senses a deeper conspiracy regarding Gregor, a hidden truth that elevates her from survivor to asset. As he lingers in the doorway, she feels the weight of a hand moving her across a board. Rest is impossible tonight. Her thoughts are a kaleidoscope of jagged glass and unanswered questions. She is trapped in a conflict where every move is traced in blood. Bereft of resources or a home, Iris exists as a phantom in Ronan's sphere. At dawn, a new figure emerges from the gloom. Declan Byrne enters, his gaze possessing the clinical coldness of a forensic exam. He is the engineer of this criminal ecosystem, the man who orchestrates the madness. Ronan looms large, dominating the physical space. He introduces Declan as a family advisor, a polite euphemism for a brutal dynasty. Iris feels the gravity of that title, sensing the weight of generations. They exchange a handshake that feels less like a greeting and more like an evaluation. She is being scrutinized by the architects of this underworld. Their eyes remain as sterile as surgical theater lights. The physical contact is a sterile transaction, brief and devoid of warmth. Declan offers a rehearsed sympathy that sounds like a eulogy. Iris seeks an ally in Ronan, but he remains a distant observer at the window. He instructs her to sit. It is phrased as an invitation, but it carries the weight of an edict. Declan assumes the chair of judgment, while Ronan stands as a silent guardian of the ritual. The atmosphere thickens with the electricity of an approaching storm. He starts his address with a warning of the pain to come. It is a cruel mercy before the blow. He is about to dismantle her reality, and he requires her full attention for the trauma. Iris folds her arms, bracing for the verbal assault. She declares that having survived Gregor, she is invincible. But Ronan delivers a revelation that shifts the earth beneath her. Her father is merely a cog in the Russian Bratva, a tiny component of a massive lethal engine. The truth is a sudden plunge into freezing water. To Iris, Gregor was a solitary monster. Now he is a specter in a worldwide catastrophe. The information floats in her mind, resisting integration. Her trauma was not just a personal failure. It was an apprenticeship for a syndicate. Her domestic nightmare has been eclipsed by an international shadow. Her reality is fracturing, and the word Mafia is the final strike. In Iris's reality, Gregor's brutality was a domestic secret. Discovering his ties to a sprawling syndicate deconstructs her world. She murmurs the word Bratva, tasting the jagged syllables of a nightmare made flesh. It is no longer a myth. Ronan reveals that Gregor fled in terror, a parasite escaping a predator. He traded his daughter's life for his own pulse, a final act of spinelessness. Iris refuses to remain blind. She turns to Ronan and demands the only answer that signifies anything. Eels. Who are you? She craves a title for the man grasping her future. She must determine if he is her redeemer or merely a more ornate cage. Eels. Their gazes collide, and for one heartbeat, Ronan permits a crack of empathy to split his persona. This is no accident. He identifies himself, the Morrigan leader, sovereign of the West Side, and the Zakharovs' sworn enemy. Around them, Eels. The atmosphere thickens, yet Iris feels her internal foundation collapse. She understands with terrifying clarity that she has simply moved from one beast's den to another. Declan watches like a silent clerk, adding a frozen, Eels, bureaucratic weight to the admission. Iris feels these truths like a cold blade carving her spirit, leaving a permanent mark. He isn't just a man. He is the master of an Irish dynasty. She is no longer just Iris. She is a pawn in a game where gods bleed. Eels. Iris exists within the ruins of her history, the child of a phantom protected by his fiercest rival. It is a deadly contradiction. She speaks with a hollow mechanical poise, the defense mechanism of the shattered. Eels. Ronan begins a meticulous dismantling of her father's shadow. He strips away Gregor's honors until only a coward remains, a man who bolted when the darkness showed its fangs. His tone conveys a polished, arctic malice. Eels. This is more than a lesson. It is a psychic operation. By erasing the father, Ronan establishes himself as the sole harbor in a sea of monsters. He acknowledges her trauma while subtly tightening the grip of his own power. Eels. Her past as a victim is being systematically deleted, replaced by a new, darker function within the Morrigan hierarchy. She is being reconstructed, brick by blood-stained brick. Eels. Ronan starts cutting the cords tying her identity to her father's crimes. For the first time, Iris feels her defenses fracture. She recognizes the grammar of violence, but the complex syntax of a shadow war leaves her voiceless. Eels. When she asks for solitude, the room fills with a professional freezing stillness. Ronan and Declan offer no hollow comfort, only the dignity of being left alone. This lack of pity is a turning point. Eels. He doesn't treat her as a casualty. He treats her as a participant. By allowing her this space, he is spinning a web of loyalty more resilient than any chain. She sits in the quiet, feeling the massive weight of her new existence. In this room, Eels, she finds a dark respect never permitted in the House of Istvan. Eels. A sudden, fierce release erupts within her, the sound of a mind snapping under impossible strain. These aren't tears of grief, but the horror of seeing the true scale of her prison. Her private suffering was just one gear in a vast, indifferent engine. Eels. Once the storm subsides, she clears her face and seeks the heart of the organization. She finds Cillian, a silent monolith of the syndicate. Unmoving, observant, and constant, he is the living phantom of the surveillance governing her world. Eels. Her question about Ronan's location signals the end of her shock. She is no longer fleeing. She is tracking the man who has become her whole universe. The curtain falls as she walks toward the Irish king. Eels. Cillian offers to guide her, but Iris chooses to walk into the flames alone. A spark of something like respect flickers in the guard's eyes, a rare moment of validation. The inner sanctum is a vault of obsidian shadows. Eels. Heavy with the weight of ancient secrets. Declan sits entombed at a massive desk, processing the lives of men like statistics. Ronan is a silhouette against the glass, anchored to the city lights below. He doesn't soften when she enters. Eels. He is a man who has forgotten the art of being still. Instead, he shifts his weight, a subtle physical adjustment to the presence of his new obsession. Iris breaks the silence, her voice a cold blade demanding the truth. Eels. She halts at a calculated distance, a buffer to keep her soul beyond his reach. Her voice remains steady as she asks about Gregor and the chance of his return. Ronan and Declan exchange a glance, a wordless, lightning-fast sink born of blood. Eels. He promises her security within these walls. She challenges him, asking if his word is a hollow oath or a cold tactical maneuver. A ghost of a smile touches his mouth as he admits it is both. By any logic of survival, she should flee this place. Instead, Eels. She chooses to remain in the heart of her father's greatest enemy. The first seeds of a dark devotion are taking root. Eels. A strange reluctance anchors her to the room, her mind already justifying the closeness of her captor. Throughout the long afternoon, Ronan moves through his grim rituals, low voices, strategic murmurs, and cold logic. Eels. Iris keeps her curiosity under lock and key, a habit forged in the shadow of violence, yet the air between them begins to thicken. Whenever she looks away, his eyes are on her, heavy and relentless. Eels. He conducts a clinical audit of her body, the bruises on her wrists, the healing cut on her lip. It is the gaze of a man recording every trauma she has suffered, writing them into a ledger of debts he intends to settle with blood. Feels. Their eyes meet and his pupils contract, the physical proof of a mind at war with itself. His movements become jagged and unpredictable. He reaches to open a door with the instinct of old-world grace, only to pull back as if burned by the very thought. Feels. These small retreats reveal a man drowning in conflict. Near midnight, the shadows stretch. Iris haunts the kitchen, using the simple task of boiling water to ground her racing heart. The penthouse is an ocean of sterile silence. Feels. Triggering a primal alert in her nerves. She is unaccustomed to this quiet. She was raised in the noise of a cage, and this predatory stillness feels far more dangerous than any storm. Feels. Ghostly footsteps announce his arrival as Ronan appears in the doorframe. Without his armor of wool and silk, he looks raw, almost vulnerable. The dark ink of a shamrock on his pale skin stands out like a bruise against the moonlight. Feels. He stops less than a single step away. The vast kitchen suddenly feels like a coffin, airless and tight. The walls seem to move inward, leaving only the heat radiating between their skin. It is a moment of pure tension, feels, where the world outside ceases to exist. There is no oxygen left in the room, only the electric pull of two broken people standing on the edge of a precipice, waiting for the fall. Feels. His gaze drops to the scar on her lip, a jagged record of a life she wants to forget. When he looks back into her eyes, the weight of it stops her breath. Not from fear, but from a primal instinct her mind cannot name. Feels. He raises his hand with the agonizing slowness of a man who weighs the world in every movement. There is no hesitation, only terrifying calculated discipline. His fingers bridge the distance, stopping exactly 1 centimeter from her skin. Feels. She can feel the burning heat of him, a magnetic pull that screams for contact. It is a silent, unfulfilled promise, a bridge built of shadows and heat that neither of them dares to cross yet. Feels. He pulls his hand back, the movement sharp and final, as he whispers a vow of total protection. His voice is a low vibration that demands her absolute silence to hear, creating a vacuum where only the two of them exist. Iris offers a fragile feels, ghost of a smile, a shield against the way her heart hammers against her ribs. She fights the sudden desperate urge to close that final centimeter of space between them. For a moment, the iron in his gaze melts. Feels. His eyes soften like a door creaking open to let a sliver of light into a tomb. In that breath, a terrifying truth is revealed. Ronan has already crossed an emotional threshold. It was not a choice. It was a sudden, violent surrender of his soul to her. Feels. He has reached the point of no return, his eyes reflecting the quiet defeat of a man who is lost and no longer cares to find his way back. He retreats into the shadows, and as the pressure of his presence lifts, Iris finally lets out a ragged breath. Feels. He vanishes with a spectral silence, leaving her alone with her cooling tea and a realization that shakes her to the core. A man who defines himself by his isolation nearly broke a decade of solitude for her, and more frightening still, she wanted him to. Feels. By morning, Iris moves through the penthouse with a new quiet authority. She no longer asks for permission to occupy his space. She finds him and Declan, ready for the coffee and the confession. Feels. He spoke of his father's murder 4 years ago with a chilling clinical detachment, omitting any emotional padding. Tragedy was a Zakharov ambush, the work of a calculating narcissist, and Ronan had watched it all unfold. Iris stood frozen, Feels, observing his flat, vacant affect. He stared out the window, discussing the death of a king as if it were mere logistics. Yet his hands betrayed the trauma. His blanched knuckles revealed a microscopic fracture in that rigid facade. Feels. Then came the truth. He was holding his father's hand as the life slipped away. His voice dropped, heavy with the labor of unearthing a fortified memory. This was a rare tactical exposure of a kingpin's core wound, shared only out of necessity. Feels. Ronan spoke of the precise second life left his father's body, a muscular surrender into death. Iris met this with a weighted clinical silence, understanding that simple words are shallow vessels for such immense trauma. Feels. She knew that to bear witness to a scar is often more healing than attempting to suture it with clumsy, forced comfort. Then Ronan exposed the root of his isolation. He had not touched another soul since that tragedy. Feels. This explains his avoidant behavior, the physical flinch and the miles of emotional distance. It was not mere coldness, but a calcified grief acting as a shield. Eventually, the armor became the man himself. Feels. Even as an outsider, she had unintentionally cracked his impenetrable fortress. She highlighted the flaw in his logic. Despite his sacred vow of solitude, he had held her. This was a direct assault on his self-imposed exile. He confessed it with a quiet shock, as if his physical self had betrayed his iron will that night. Suddenly, Declan broke the spell with a sharp, tactical cough, a boundary set against these dangerous waters. With the fluid grace of a predator, Ronan pulled his professional mask back into position. He donned his psychological plate mail once more, steering the conversation with the icy precision of a master negotiator. The man vanished back into the role. Soraya's entrance was heralded by a sharp auditory signature, the rhythmic strike of heels, and a voice that filled the room long before she did. She immediately probed Cillian, the stoic guard, mocking his rigid posture by questioning his very humanity. Cillian's dry response, noting his own subtle eye movements, only served to confirm his biological reality. When Soraya finally laughed, it acted as a potent emotional solvent, dissolving the heavy atmosphere. Iris joined in, finding a rare moment of ventilation. This was not the sound of joy, but a necessary physiological release of pent-up pressure. This brief flash of normalcy acted as a restorative balm within a clinical world defined by trauma and iron-fisted control. We view that laughter as a primitive defense mechanism, a brief psychological escape from a life that has become a tragic case study. For 1 minute, the diagnostic burden of the day felt light enough to carry. In the hallway, Ronan paused, a telling hesitation captured by Cillian's clinical gaze. Cillian processed every sound with the cold focus of a data analyst, measuring the subtle shift in Ronan's momentum. He recorded the observation, knowing this tremor in the foundation would eventually become a critical factor. That night, as the subject fought for cognitive rest, Ronan received intelligence that fundamentally shifted the emotional temperature of their world. The game had changed. At first, the subject remained oblivious to the tectonic shifts occurring beneath her. Awareness only leaked through the cracks, the suffocating tension on the upper floor, and the hushed tactical calls Declan made in private. The data confirmed that Gregor Istvan was no common soldier. He was a traitor within the crime family, a recurring pathology among low-level opportunists. He was selling Russian secrets to rivals, a betrayal that carried a mandatory death sentence. My assessment of the father shifted from a simple coward to a high-risk liability. This revelation sparked a change in Ronan. His eyes took on the cold focus of a grandmaster seeing 10 moves ahead before the final lethal execution. Although access was restricted, the subject bypassed protocol on the third day to enter the command center. The triad was already in place. Ronan sat at the head, Declan managed the data, and Cillian stood as the silent enforcer. It was the image of a power hierarchy that had thrived for years. As she walked in, Ronan turned toward her with a heavy, familiar presence, a silent assertion of his dominance. "I want to know what is going on," the subject stated. Her voice was steady, a rehearsed demand rather than a request. It was a brave attempt to reclaim agency in this clinical space. Declan instinctively tried to maintain operational secrecy, claiming the details were too high risk for her clearance. However, Ronan issued a sudden, authoritarian command. "She stays." This sharp break in protocol forced a brief recalibration in Declan, a glitch in his logical processing of the internal hierarchy. Cillian remained a static shadow in the corner. The subject took a seat at the far end of the table, her hands folded in a submissive posture as Ronan presented his findings. "Your father is not just a low-level asset," he began, delivering his analysis with the detached precision of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome of this cold disclosure. The dossier confirmed that Gregor had been selling sensitive organization data for 2 years. He was liquidating vital supply routes and assets for his own profit. In the subject's mind, this information served as a catalyst, finally aligning her fragmented memories of burner phones and erratic moods into a clear pattern of criminal pathology. When she questioned Ronan's true goal, it became a moment of mutual assessment. In that space, Ronan did not appear as a protector. He looked like the megalomaniac narcissist and strategist who saw intelligence only as leverage. He was no longer the man she knew in the kitchen. He was the head of a massive criminal enterprise. The strategy was to hand the problem directly to Viktor Zakharov, the rival head of the Russian Bratva. This was a calculated gambit, using the traitor as a peace offering instead of a declaration of war. Ronan explained the move with a rhythm that suggested the ending was already written. By exposing the betrayal, Gregor would be stripped of all protection and social rank. Deals. It was a diplomatic maneuver designed to force a ceasefire through the weight of a necessary truth. Declan confirmed the goal was a strategic alliance, not one built on trust, which is a rare variable in these files, deals, but on mutual profit and the preservation of strength, deals. This was not an alliance of friendship, but a calculated pause in hostilities. In the heavy silence that followed, a psychological bond formed, one suggesting the early stages of Stockholm Syndrome, deals. The subject realized that this complex maneuver was not for land or power, but for her own personal safety. It was a dangerous truth that Ronan allowed her to witness. She attempted to push back against this narrative, deals, stating clearly that she was not a piece on his chessboard. It was a desperate attempt to maintain a boundary between his protection and his psychological control, knowing that if she did not speak now, her identity would be swallowed by his agenda, deals. The air grew thick with tension, the precursor to a major psychological event. Ronan's response was a stunning admission for a man of his status. If you were a game piece, I would not be losing, deals. The silence that followed was heavy with the gravity of that confession. Declan buried himself in his paperwork to ignore the breach of professional protocol, while Cillian showed a rare glimmer of amusement, deals. The subject sat at the center of this shift, her heart racing as she realized she held a unique power over the Grandmaster. The narcissist had admitted to a loss of control, a rare and dangerous deviation from his usual profile, deals. The following days were defined by two conflicting forces. First was the meticulous construction of the case against Gregor, a process of building a metaphorical cage around the traitor, deals. Second was the slow erosion of the emotional distance between the subject and the kingpin. While their physical proximity remained the same, the internal walls were crumbling, inch by inch, through shared silences and heavy looks, deals. This slow psychological merging continued until a new external stimulus arrived in the form of a direct message, shattering the established rhythm of their isolation and forcing a new, unpredictable reaction from the triad, deals. She sat in the dim quarters with Soraya, a living bridge to a past she hoped to bury. Outside, the world turned with its usual rhythm, but her reality had been shattered. A courier, trembling and small, deals, delivered an envelope that Cillian filed away with a cold glance. Inside was a note from Gregor, written in a frantic, jagged hand that cut through her mind like a surgical scar. It was a poison, deals, a direct injection of her father's sickness into this sanctuary, intended to break her from a distance using only fear and lies, deals. The ink claimed Ronan was the monster, and she was merely a pawn in his game. It was a classic manipulation, the abuser painting the protector as the villain to keep the victimated. At first, a cold Pavlovian terror took hold of her, deals, the old ghost of her father's voice. But as she read the words again, she saw the sender's true weakness. Gregor was not trying to save her, he was clawing for his lost throne. Soraya spat a curse in her native tongue, deals, a sharp sound that exposed the pathetic desperation behind the frantic script and the hollow man who wrote it, deals. Choosing Ronan wasn't about faith, it was the final autopsy of her trust in Gregor, a necessary evolution of her internal geography. Ronan appeared shortly after, summoned by Cillian's network of watchers. He carried a heavy, lethal stillness, deals, the sort of silence that signals an incoming storm. But she didn't flinch. She stepped forward, reclaiming the narrative from him. Handing him the document, she repeated Gregor's toxic warnings of manipulation. She met his gaze directly, deals, forcing the master tactician to account for his role in this grim cycle of blood and heritage, deals. Ronan occupied the center of the room like a monument of intent. He neither advanced nor recoiled. His focus sharpened until she became his entire universe. His voice became a cold, surgical tool as he posed the ultimate ultimatum, deals. Do you believe him or me? There was no affection, only the gravity of the choice. Then she saw it. Those dark green eyes thawed, moving from a sentry stare to a strange, genuine softness, deals. It is during these fleeting seconds that the heart starts to fall in love with the bars of its own prison, deals. Observe his calculated movements. Incapable of standard affection, he channels his entire being into her protection. When she moved toward him, a tentative gesture, half trusting but no longer terrified, it was a bridge constructed in the shadows, deals. Ronan's gaze tightened as he analyzed the moment. Relief didn't follow, his pride was far too immense. Instead, it was the chilling, mechanical click of a lock. Her response provided the definitive evidence he required. A thick silence descended, deals. When he finally walked away, his trajectory was absolute. He had ceased being a shield. He had become a hunter. Eels. This transcended business or turf. It was visceral, a rare fracture in his steel logic. 3 days later, they met in a darkened pocket of Chicago, a lawless vacuum. Ronan entered with surgical precision, his enforcers lingering in the shadows. Viktor Zakharov waited for him, a man built like a blade with eyes like burnt ash. He had witnessed too much slaughter to possess mercy. A literal ghost of the Soviet engine, he sat in silence, curious to see what the new sovereign demanded. Eels. Zakharov wielded silence like a weapon, offering no acknowledgement as Ronan drew near. He observed with the starving patience of a wolf in winter. His heavy Russian accent turned the name Morrigan into a death knell. Ronan remained unmoved, Eels, sliding a leather file across the desk like he was submitting an autopsy report. For 4 agonizing minutes, Zakharov remained expressionless. However, his hands betrayed him. By the second page, his grip turned pale. By the third, Eels, his shaking thumb mangled the corner of the document in a mute explosion of fury. Eels. That ensuing silence was a binding agreement. Zakharov viewed the revelation as a personal grievance, a debt that required a blood sacrifice. Ronan retreated with predatory elegance, Eels, never breaking eye contact, a wordless respect shared by 2 executioners. Artificial pleasantries weren't necessary. Later, Declan confirmed the news. Gregor was destroyed. The Bratva had discarded him, leaving him to rot. In the vacuum, Eels, a brittle peace emerged. It wasn't rooted in compassion, but in the cold realization that mutual annihilation was simply too expensive. Eels. It was a mercenary peace, maintained solely by the steep cost of treason. She sat in the quiet, her mind spinning from the cold efficiency of Ronan's maneuver. He had deleted her tormentor, Gregor, without shedding one drop of blood. Eels. It was a precise operation, cutting out a tumor through the mere weight of his reputation. A suffocating wave of relief washed over her, followed immediately by a stinging dread. If he could dismantle a man like Gregor with a single word, Eels, she was utterly defenseless. When she eventually tracked him down, he was solitary. Eels. He waited by the window, a solitary figure framed by the pulsing lights of Chicago. He forced her to wait, letting her know he felt every breath she took. When she finally whispered her question, her voice lacked its usual protective shell. Eels. It was an unvarnished, vulnerable moment. Ronan turned, his gaze piercing her, making her feel exposed yet truly understood. This was the perilous closeness of a prisoner finding refuge in her jailer's shadow. He offered only a few words, Eels. He did it because in 24 years nobody had ever bothered to defend her. Eels. That confession stung more than any physical hit. It wasn't a romantic vow, but a grim recognition of the 2 decades she spent fleeing for survival. She had existed in perpetual terror, a phantom with no protector until he stepped into the light. Eels. She didn't weep. Crying was too superficial for a debt this profound. Instead, the atmosphere between them altered. The connection was finalized. She wasn't his captive by force anymore. She remained because she chose the cage. Eels. The fugitive had ceased her flight, deciding to exist within his shadow world. Eels. Ronan sensed the shift immediately. For a heartbeat, his composure fractured, a subtle flicker in his eyes, a softening of his stiff posture. This was a man who had insulated himself from intimacy since the day his father died. He extended his hand, Eels, palm turned upward. It wasn't the order of a mob boss, but a mute, awkward request for a connection he didn't know how to verbalize. He was lowering the drawbridge to his inner sanctum, welcoming her into a territory he normally patrolled. Eels. It was a transition from absolute dominance to a shared dark union. Eels. She gazed at his outstretched hand, her body recalling his touch with frightening precision. The sensation was seared into her nervous system, bypassing thought entirely. When she eventually met his skin, his fingers enveloped hers with a gentle, Eels, deliberate power that spoke of years of isolated discipline. Each point of contact felt like a barrier collapsing. His palm was burning and wide, a physical bulwark promising safety. As his hold intensified, Eels, the ball of anxiety in her chest vanished, replaced by the heavy, silent awareness that her world had been permanently rewritten. Eels. This was a profound transformation, occurring with the surreal speed of a fever dream. Ronan studied her with a quiet, alien curiosity, as if shocked by his own capacity for emotion. He guided her into the Morrigan suite, Eels, a hidden realm she had only known through rumors. The doors parted to reveal a Chicago skyline that seemed to bow at his feet. The space was frigid, precise, and flawless, an architectural reflection of his own psyche. Eels. Every detail was crafted to dominate, a concrete testament to his influence and the absolute grip he maintained over his empire. Feels. The urban expanse below served as a schematic of his total authority. Inside the flat, masonry and wood swapped comfort for a chilly, focused intent. When he released her hand, the sudden drop in temperature felt like a heartless desertion. Feels. Ronan poured 2 measures of whiskey. The golden liquid served as a grounding force for Iris and her frantic pulse. She drank, the alcohol searing a trail through her core, anchoring her against the dual tides of dread and desire. Feels. Her craving for him had to turn primal, a basic survival drive that ignored every internal alarm. Proximity was no longer a decision. It was a biological requirement when facing such a dominant force. Feels. They slid down to the floor against the cold window, city lights witnessing their quiet surrender. The structure of master and subject disintegrated. Iris collapsed first, her legs failing under the immense pressure of the evening. Feels. And Ronan joined her silently. In that hushed vacuum, the lines between them moved irrevocably. She whispered about a life in flux, a past spent fleeing the darkness of a broken home. Her existence had been a series of disguises and feels, a frantic effort to remain unseen. But now, under the scrutiny of a man who bypassed every defense, Iris was compelled to face her own reflection. Evasion was no longer possible. Feels. Iris exhibits the classic symptoms of someone who never truly belonged, the predictable outcome of a life shaped by abandonment. She identifies with her own voids, lacking heritage or anyone to lean on. Her fixation on that cheap diner, Feels, characterized by grueling hours and poor pay, is merely a shallow replacement for a home. She realizes it is tragic that a greasy spoon is her sole refuge. For her, Soraya and those endless graveyard shifts are a brittle mimicry of affection, Feels, a pattern designed to fend off the abyss. Acknowledging the hollowness of that existence would destroy her. Consequently, she remains paralyzed, locked within a mental cell of her own design. Feels. Ronan navigates with the chilling elegance of a hunter, his stoic facade masking a psyche tuned for combat. He discusses the assassination of his father, the only model of masculinity he ever knew. Feels. It was a savage execution by the Zakharov cell, 2 vehicles, 6 gunmen, and 3 rounds that rewrote history. Ronan recounts the gore in the pavement with a detached, haunting precision. Feels. Recalling the exact sensation of his father's hand as his vitality evaporated, that instant shattered him. For decades, he rejected all physical intimacy, viewing a simple touch as a lethal contagion. He resided in a private dungeon of solitude, Feels, certain that contact would only herald the same decay that claimed his bloodline. Feels. For Ronan, intimacy is a prelude to mourning. His body treats a hand held as a liability, a vulnerability he cannot afford. This is the psychology of a man shaped by a world where love is a weakness. Yet Iris identifies the crack in his facade. Feels. She observes the contradiction. He is violating his own code just to be near her. It marks the start of a perilous transition, where the roles of predator and prey dissolve. Her voice becomes a resonant vibration, eroding his internal barricades. Feels. The quietude between them is a taut cord across a void. Eventually, Ronan yields. He extends a hand, finally dismantling the mental architecture of his isolation. Feels. His contact is clinical, finding the physical memory of her trauma, the thin scar upon her lip. This is a redemptive ritual, an attempt by the architect of her pain to reconstruct the narrative. As his thumb traces the path of old violence, Feels, the oxygen departs her lungs, her perception consumed by his gravity. The constant assessment ends, replaced by an absolute yielding. A shared forehead press carries the weight of a confession, a profound breach of his tactical silence. Feels. Within the shared rhythm of their breath, a connection emerges that transcends the carnal. The external world, with all its organized chaos, simply fades into the background. Feels. The utterance of her name signals the death of the commander. Their initial kiss is weighted by a lethal hesitation, a realization that this threshold is final. Then, the dam breaks. Feels. Decades of repressed appetite erupt as Ronan abandons his celebrated stoicism. He claims her with a chilling possessiveness, hands acting as shackles of desire. Even in passion, he retains the strategic precision of a syndicate leader. Feels. Surveying her form like contested land. He is a creature of absolute dominance, transforming a moment of vulnerability into a calculated acquisition. This is intimacy filtered through the pathology of power. Feels, where every caress is an act of total ownership. Feels. Iris is acutely attuned to his physicality, the rigid strength and the warmth of his skin. Her fear has mutated, evolving into a primal necessity for proximity. She has arrived at the psychological zenith where the predator becomes the only refuge. Heals. Ronan maintains a terrifying efficiency, redirecting a body designed for combat toward this new objective. He elevates her with effortless power, moving toward the shadows of the bedroom. The universe contracts into a singular point of focus. Heals. All that remains is the sound of synchronized respiration and the tactile friction of contact. Intellectualizing ceases. They are merely living within the unrefined, electric intensity of the now. Heals. He settles her onto the mattress with a focus that borders on pathology. Despite his quickening pulse, Ronan maintains his structural dominance. This is not a lapse in discipline, Heals, but a concentrated manifestation of devotion from a man starved of human contact. When he finally allows himself to experience her, the sensory input is staggering. He looms over her, a silhouette constructing a private reality for them both. Heals. For Iris, his physical mass is not an instrument of intimidation. Instead, it serves as a grounding force. For once, she is secured by a gravity more potent than her own paralyzing terror. Heals. Iris oscillates between total exposure and a bizarre serenity. Ronan hangs above her, the ink of his shamrock tattoo marking him as a sovereign of the underworld. When he vows her safety, the frequency of his voice vibrates within her marrow. Heals. Her immediate belief in him is both a liberation and a nightmare, the definitive trait of a complex trauma bond. He proceeds with an agonizing, methodical slowness, forcing her to register every nuanced movement. Heals. This is a tactical erosion of her resistance. He is not merely shedding her garments. He is systematically deconstructing every psychological wall she ever raised, executing the task with the precision of a surgeon. Heals. This sensation is unprecedented for Iris, a contact that seems to rewrite her very essence. As his lips find the curve of her neck, instinct overrides intellect, and clarity dissolves. Their clothing is discarded like obsolete armor, remnants of a conflict that no longer exists within these four walls. The calculated Heals. She traces the scar on his sternum, a cartography of a brutal existence. Yet his gaze reveals a profound, tragic sanctity beyond mere appetite. He moves with a deliberate patience, demanding her focus as they merge. It is an unfamiliar Heals, suffocating wholeness, mending a void she has harbored for a lifetime. "Look at me," he murmurs. It is an order to be witnessed in her entirety. Their gazes bind, and the material world dissolves into static. This bond transcends the physiological. Heals. It is the absolute capitulation of two fractured spirits. In this instant, the fortifications of her soul collapse. She is finally, utterly undone. Heals. Ronan occupies a mental ledge, his defenses pulverized. In this state of exposure, his eyes reveal a gentleness that contradicts his persona as a ruthless syndicate head. This marks his first intimate contact in 4 years, a desolate anniversary. Heals. For someone who weaponized solitude, this closeness is a frightening alien geography. The tempo accelerates, each motion calibrated to ignite every nerve. We witness the physiological cost, the perspiration, the rising temperature, Heals, and the shared breath of two entities converging. They ascend toward a crescendo without reservation. It is a rare, authentic encounter for them both, a raw manifestation of a hunger that cannot be undone. Heals. Iris adjusts, pulling him inward, and Ronan emits a sound marking the absolute expiration of his restraint. His vocalization of her name is a white flag, a total admission of his defeat. She reaches the threshold first, her form convulsing in a sudden, Heals, intense discharge of years of repressed emotion. Ronan follows instantly, his body locking in a final frantic gesture of unity. That low, fractured sound he makes is the audible crack of his soul. Heals. It is the resonance of a chest cavity, unable to hold a sentiment too expansive for its boundaries, a sensation so ancient it lacks a modern name. Heals. They remain in the subsequent silence, suspended in the moment. Ronan is a substantial, radiating presence, his respiration leveling out as his fingers comb through her hair. For a king of shadows, Heals, this is an unthinkable act of gentleness, one that draws unnamed tears to her eyes. Dialogue is redundant. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline flickers, unaware of the tectonic shift within these walls. She settles against him, Heals, monitoring the deceleration of his heart into a consistent rhythmic beat. To Iris, that pulse mimics the sound of sanctuary, despite the underlying deception. Meanwhile, his hand maintains its rhythmic path, a reflexive touch born of a hidden need. Heals. His frame transforms into a barricade, a protective cage he unknowingly provides. "I chose to stay," she murmurs, opting for this gilded confinement over the desolate freedom of the world. It is the gravitational pull of a shattered connection. Heals. His movement hesitates for a fleeting moment, a stutter in his ruthless calculus, before resuming. Silence is his only response, yet his embrace narrows, a mute and binding promise. She slides toward unconsciousness, feels, abandoning a defense she maintained for 24 years. Enveloped by his warmth, she allows the phantom of security to suppress her survival instincts. She feels protected, she tells herself, even as she drifts further into the dark. Feels. His pulse is the singular anchor for her drifting spirit. High above the urban sprawl, two fractured souls discover a fleeting, frantic peace. She yields. His fortifications collapse. For this evening, the deception suffices. Feels. This concludes the opening movement, yet the sequel is already unfolding. Access the remainder of their odyssey through our exclusive portal. Iris believed her threshold was met, but she was mistaken. Feels. Her reality fractured upon the discovery of a solitary photograph. It served as the evidence that her entire history was a meticulously engineered falsehood, a comprehensive, cold betrayal of her very identity. Feels. Her psyche recoiled as the inquiries grew deafening. Reality was a hazard. Her name, her lineage, her core self began to disintegrate under the pressure of revelation. In the domain of Ronan Morgan, Feels. Secrets are not merely hidden. They are the decay under the foundation. Excavating her past promised to annihilate her remaining fragments. As mentioned, this is merely the preface to the second volume. To witness the unedited narrative, Feels, select the link provided in the pinned comment. The complete archive awaits your arrival. Follow that primary link now for the uninterrupted experience. It is a simple step, and the revelation is yours to claim. Feels. The following installment is far more chilling. Your engagement fuels these analyses. It delves into the most visceral desires and the shadows of the human condition. Due to the graphic nature of this arc, standard platforms have restricted access. The full data is preserved within our private collection.